Good afternoon. Hey everyone, this is Andy Sajous here. I am one of our field CTOs focusing primarily on healthcare, and I'm welcoming you to today's webinar. Today's webinar is titled Building a Cyber Resiliency Program for Healthcare, and it's sponsored by our friends at Rubrik. Today's a two-part series of a webinar series focusing on healthcare. Our first part was April 9th, Cyber Resiliency with Epic, and more importantly, IRE on AWS. That recording can be found on the HEAD's webpage. And then also today's session will also be recorded for broader audiences. As we kind of talk about kind of our investment in healthcare, has been spending a lot of time focusing not only on local events like the Chicago Healthcare Collaborative that we did about a month ago, our healthcare summit that we did 2 weeks ago, as well as represented in today's webinar series. And so look to see more events like this coming from the healthcare team at AHEAD, and more importantly, the broad audience. So I guess, by way of introduction, I do want to introduce Josh Howell and Jonathan Kowall. I'll allow them to kind of introduce themselves and more importantly, their roles at Rubrik and AHEAD. Josh, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Josh Howell. I'm Rubrik's Healthcare CTO and get to work with a wide variety of our healthcare organizations across the country. Thanks for having me.
And Jonathan Kowall, lead a team of specialist engineers here at AHEAD, where we focused on all the modern data center technologies. And one of the big ones for us is data protection, where we get to enjoy the partnership with Rubrik.
Perfect. Josh, maybe I'll kind of lead it to you in regards to the state of cyber resiliency in healthcare. Yeah.
Sure. So, cyber resiliency in healthcare, when we think about the tremendous work that healthcare organizations have done to build meaningful use into these platforms, we know that when applications are unavailable, we see medical errors increased by, say, 30%, is what some third-party studies show. And as a result of that, and the number of outages and ransomware attacks and data breaches, it's really kind of unsurprising that then we see movement to regulate in this space and ensure that organizations are making the investments necessary to bring applications back online. And regardless of where you stand or where you think this regulation may end up, if it ever comes to fruition, whether or not more reasonable timelines and other things are negotiated remains a bit of a question. But as of today, the notice of proposed rulemaking calls for a few things that I think are meaningful and relevant to a lot of the healthcare IT practitioners out there. And the first is being able to document where the PHI and PII is on an ongoing basis. So when we think about how do we do that, not just record and document where we think the PII is, but where it actually is, that's a huge challenge. Knowing what applications are critical to your business and the relative priority of what you'd bring back online in what order. And then lastly, I think the big one that everybody looked at was, how do we recover those critical applications in 72 hours? So regardless of where this regulation ends up, I think what, Jonathan and the rest of the AHEAD team are going to show us today are some models around how we can hopefully strive for that goal and try and make that a reality. So let's just assume for today, if this regulation was rolled out, how could we meet it, right?
Yeah.
Next slide. And so one of the things that I like to talk with organizations about is I know every healthcare organization, you've got, 100 things to afford and get done, and we've got time and budget for maybe 19 of them. And I think too often what happens is when we think about cyber resilience, when we think about data breaches, we focus on the headline grabbing items. So that's things like, the outage or the, ransom that was paid. And it's interesting when you quantify the total results, and here are the 14 categories that I've got up on the screen, comes from the Deloitte Beneath the Surface case study. And they actually lay out 14 different categories of costs that when we go through the work of trying to assign cost to each one of those, what we find is actually some 90% of the costs that are quite predictable and significant are what Deloitte calls beneath the surface. They don't get a lot of attention. People don't think about them because after all, we recovered, we got back online. That was 6 months ago. But unfortunately, those costs continue to play out, say over the first 5 years post-attack. There's actually really significant cost. And so I think having a full accounting of all of those costs and a full picture of the financial impact helps us decide where on our list of priorities cyber resilience really belongs, right? So let's go ahead to the next slide. So this is a hypothetical US healthcare system. Because I built this slide, it's about 10 hospital system with about $5 billion in revenue, a little larger than the median, but certainly not by too much. And we've actually built a model at Rubrik where we can help quantify some of those costs. Not every single one. There are a tremendous number of costs that we can't quantify from the outside. So things like overtime costs, or the increased cost to raise capital, what happens when you lose grant and study funding, or increased attrition of employees. It's very difficult for us to assign a number to those without the collaboration of somebody in financial planning and analysis or a CFO for IT. But we can actually take just some really basic numbers from the outside of your organization: revenue, number of hospitals, number of beds, and we can come up with a pretty good assessment of what your financial impacts might actually look like. And so in this case, $169 million over the first 5 years. And then we can tease out, the categories that Rubrik can impact. Some things, they're not going to change, right? You're still going to pay lawyers almost the same amount, whether it's a big breach or a little breach, a big outage or a small outage. You're probably going to run a very thorough investigation. You should definitely remediate your environment. Those numbers don't change, but if we can shrink the outage through a faster recovery, and that's where a cyber resilience program comes in. And if we can shrink the amount of data that is in your environment that is regulated but somewhat unsecured, then we can shrink the overall size of the notification process, the eventual class action settlement, and some of the brand damage. So we can actually make a very strong case for why these numbers are quite realistic. And what I really like to do is sit down with an organization and go through the numbers, and then walk through with their CFO or somebody from FP&A and use the assumptions that they want and their actual numbers. For instance, with overtime, we believe that COVID staffing is a fairly good predictor of what overtime staffing would be during the duration of a ransomware outage, right? So the reason I think these numbers are important is because no organization has infinite calories, right? We all have limited budgets. We have to figure out where to place our bets. And when you have a number that represents the true financial impact and risk, then we can decide what is a warranted or unnecessary expenditure. Let's go on.
And Josh, I think just to kind of replay on that, obviously, when organizations look to actually build solutions like this, or more importantly, recovery solutions, I think factoring the cost profile and the risk is important, because many organizations may look at maybe not wanting to invest in these spaces. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think it's not wanting to invest. We all want to do the best job, but if you're a CFO and you have X number of capital, and you only have so much operating budget, the question is what remains undone, right? And the assertion that I want to make is, when you truly quantify the potential losses and financial impact across a 5-year period, this number is large enough that I think it probably gets a CFO's attention. It warrants additional budget. And in health system after health system, we see that when we do a good job of quantifying the business case for a cyber resilience program, and they take that to the board often responds by, hey, let's make more money available that was outside the normal budget that was set out for this year, because the financial impacts, the brand damage and all of that is so severe that it's worth doing something about.
That's great.
Yeah. So when we think about cyber resilience and we think about reducing that impact to business, we talk in terms of the minimum viable hospital. And what I mean by that is, if you had to recover a subset of your applications, so let's think about that 72-hour timeline. There is nobody who's going to be able to bring on all their fleet of applications. Whether you're a smaller end system with, say, 600 applications, or you've got 2,600 applications, you're not going to be able to recover all of those in 72 hours. So then we're starting to dial that back to, what are the truly critical applications for our, rev cycle? And so then we start thinking in terms of not just like tracking employee hours and getting employees paid. That's very important, but also some other things that are put in doubt in a ransomware attack. So we've seen cases where Active Directory is completely compromised, and you have the need to restore your identity back to a previous point in time. And then there's things like collaboration, which some hospital systems who go through our immersive ransomware experience, think tabletop but different, find that that's actually super important, because before we can conduct a recovery, we need to be able to plan the recovery. And then things like facilities, how do we get people in and out? And then all of those applications that are critical to intaking patients and treating them, being able to order tests, being able to order supplies. On day 2 after a ransomware attack, we're still going to have people in beds who we have to feed. So being able to continue to fill our supply chain is really important. Next sample, next slide. So the last thing I want to leave you with is, for the last 20 years, we've done a tremendous amount of work. There is a huge body of knowledge around business continuity and disaster recovery, but most of that is aimed at negating the loss of a facility. So for instance, I have a data center, my primary data center, a backhoe did what backhoes do, cut the fiber optics. Now that's no longer usable for me. Or we lost power, or there was a flood, right? In this context, our environment is still trusted. We still are just focused on dealing with a technical problem. This is not the case when you deal with a cyber recovery. In the case of a cyber recovery, we may have had an attacker in our environment for an extensive period of time, and we have a question of what accounts did they create? Did they alter firewall configs? Did they install remote access tools that they could use to regain access to the environment after the attack's been remediated? And so this is what necessitates the use of an isolated recovery environment that's sterile, that couldn't have been contaminated at the same time as our production and DR environments. Because production and DR are often tied together in the same security domain, any exploit that compromised our trust in production likely also compromised our trust in DR. So then we have a question of, where do we run the applications that we bring back online? That critical set of applications in those 12 categories that I highlighted, they need to run somewhere. And the last thing I want is to recover them into an environment that maybe we have ongoing problems with. So we have an on again, off again issue, and multiple sets of fresh data records in different versions of databases that then have to be melded together. So often organizations are turning to an isolated recovery environment. And I think that brings us to Mr. Kowall and a discussion of how AHEAD can help develop true
Yeah.
cyber resilience through creating isolated recovery environments on demand.
Well,
Yeah,
one thing I
thanks.
want to add before John kind of jumps in,
Yep.
and
Yep.
Josh, just placate me for a second. I think this is a common misconception a lot of organizations I walk into, where they think they have DR solved, and so maybe they have dedicated infrastructure, and they're like, well, we have a DR plan, or we have DR built out. And I think that the biggest thing I kind of try to tell them is, a lot of the technologies on the DR side are real-time replication, and more importantly, I think you even covered it, right? So meaning the real-time replication is going to replicate infected data or infected environments over to DR. And so the RTOs and RPOs that we've been so accustomed to for the past 10 plus years just don't play here, right? I think we're talking about different RTO and RPO, and maybe more importantly, different solutions in place to support this. I mean, would you and John agree?
Oh, 100%. I think that's the bullet point on here that's important to me is data trust. In a disaster, right, the way Josh stated it was perfect. You failed in the infrastructure level, and we need to solve a technical problem. In a cyber recovery, we failed at trusting our data. Someone has done something to disrupt that, and we need to rebuild that trust. And that I focus on that in discussions, because when you're talking about the IRE and where we want to take it, where we want to take customers, is how do I rebuild that trust as quickly as possible? But I'm also, to your point, I'm not coming off of a real-time replica of data. I'm probably having to roll back further in time to find a good clean copy, go through a process that says, hey, I trust it again, and then come back to production. And that's the model that we've built, is to help customers come up with a plan to get there. The industry, IT overall, is starting to come up with some standards for people to be able to follow. This has been an area where I think there's been enough of a disruption that the industry needs their models to follow. But we want to create a model and a framework that people can build towards to be able to achieve what HIPAA is going to require at some point. Or you can see this in the financials starting to come out, where if one we've been focused on recently, NYDFS, right? They kind of going after Wall Street to say, hey, here's the financial standards you need to follow. So as those regulations are coming available, we have a model that we want to follow that gets you to a point where you can meet that, and then start to achieve those goals of the 72-hour RPO, which is kind of pretty hard to do in a cyber event. And you're not going to be able to do it without automation. And that's the big thing we love to talk about here. Our CTO loves the term relentless automation. Anything that can be automated should be automated. But the foundation for that in the model is having a product that you can trust that I'm going to have a good copy of data. And that's where we see Rubrik solving the problem for level 0 or level 1. I have good backups. I have good quality backups. They're protected in a known state that I can recover from. But how do I rebuild that trust from that? And that's where we build up to the recovery copy. In some instances, and probably many instances, I'm going to be able to just trust what Rubrik's going to give me, but I got to go through and validate that. And there may be some copies of data. This is where the new turbo threat hunting becomes a real value to say, hey, an event happened. I have an IOC. Let me go search for that and find where anywhere else this might be in my environment. But before I bring that back to production, what do I need to do to rebuild that trust, right? And that's where I'm crossing the boundaries internal, looking at other teams to help me out. I need network to give me their blessing. I need security to give me their blessing, right? The CISO have probably established a standard that gets me there. And that's where we move into that IRE. And how do I do that? And how do I do that effectively? And that's the offering that we've built today is, right, how do I get to level 2 and do it well? And then how do I move from level 2 to 3 to 4 to 5? And the more automation that I build in, the faster I can recover. If you think about this in a time scale, how am I going back to a point in time that's a known good copy and bringing that forward as good and as clean as possible? In the HIPAA standards, one of the things that, like the way I read it, when they're saying, hey, I need to recover an application within 72 hours, that's not just recovering the application and saying, hey, it's good and up and running, but I'm also not going to get reinfected, which is something we have seen happen to customers where they go do a restore of data. They just restore, hey, I got hit today, so let me restore yesterday's backup. But all they did was restore the infection or restore the hole that somebody exploited to get into the environment. That's why the isolation of the recovery environment is important, because I have a place where I can restore that copy, find out if it's good, run several different tools against it. I'm going to use Rubrik to identify that copy and start the process, and then do what Rubrik does well and restore a copy of data very quickly in multiple places, or not in multiple places, but available in multiple places. So I'm coming off a recovery copy. Once I establish that, I can run that through a standby production environment. It says, hey, I've trusted my data. Now let me, if I need to separate those processes, let me trust the production copy, which how is that interacting between applications? Or how is that application reacting to other applications outside of maybe where the infection happened? Let me build the operational standards. And then once I'm good with that, how do I automate all of it? And that's where we want to get to. And today, a little more what we want to talk about is the IRE and the capability to that. And we have some reference architectures to show for customers that we built this for. And if we don't get too many questions, or hopefully we do get questions, but if not, we can walk through a live demo of a customer environment that we built, that we brought into our cloud space to kind of show what we're going after. And the last point, Josh mentioned this really well, the financial impact of this. How do I adopt this, right? I've already spent a lot of money on DR. I've essentially built a second data center for my most critical applications. Do I now need to go build a third data center or a third full copy of data and infrastructure resources to run that? Or can I start to adopt on-demand access to resources and consume it when I need it? There's going to be a certain amount of resources that need to be available all the time to kind of run the automation. But how do I rent those resources? In a perfect place without a landing zone for that is in the cloud, and take advantage of building out environments on demand. Let's stand this up, give it a copy of data, check for cleanness or clean it up, and then bring it back to production.
And Jonathan, I want to call out something, because I think this is somewhat could be a new concept for some client or some people attending the webinar. Is obviously the focus on isolated recovery environments, or also able to clean room, and then standby production. Because I think many times in client conversations, sometimes that kind of merges into a singular entity. But I think what I want to call out for our viewers is, like, the recommendation is we're looking at both, right? Meaning isolated recovery or clean room to build and test, but then a standardized production that obviously isolated from original production that we can actually bring the applications to.
Yeah, and do I need to separate the validation of the data from the validation of the application, or could I do those in the same spot? I think that depends on the customer, and their requirements, and what the CISO ultimately is trying to say, hey, my name's on the line, right? I have to define that. We're starting to see customers push that to say, hey, the SPE needs to be separated from the IRE. And in this slide, you see this, step 1 is production, normal backlog, and I'm creating a replicated copy. And I'm putting that in an isolated area. Sometimes you'll see that in the industry called a vault. We like to call that a recovery copy with Rubrik, because I get my vault capability off of my production copy, which is, I think, pretty unique about the Rubrik offering. But then I have that clean room where I can promote that copy of data and restore it, and go check for any of the problems there. Move that copy to the SPE, and do my validation, right? And then there's some critical pieces to this, right? Bandwidth you see in the bottom right is important. But what are the other tools that are going to bring you to that level of comfort? There's a lot out there. You actually see them in our reference architecture. We've seen customers make different different choices on solutions. You get EDRs and an XDR. I'm working at DSPM. Rubrik has a great DSPM tool. We ran it against our cloud environment, and we passed all the check starts, so we felt good about that. And then how do I size it? So a lot of times people think, hey, my clean room needs to be a full copy of production. But we want to break that down into the segments. And you saw Josh get a really good list of the applications that I'm going to restore. And I might restore those in different ways. I'm going to put Active Directory back different than I put back my Epic database or my middleware servers for accessing, hyperspace inside of Epic. Right? How was that EDI environment cook out? So those are going to happen in a different way. And if you look at it as those are segments of applications, and I'm going to be building through automation on-demand clean rooms, I can now segment the clean rooms and order those in the way I'm going to restore the applications. I may not have enough resources to go in and validate all of my data because I don't have enough people. Well, let me stand up clean rooms on demand for the different applications and drive that through automation. So it's like, hey, I'm going to define, and I love the term that Rubrik uses, minimum viable company, or in healthcare, minimum viable hospital. What are the IT systems that I need to get up and running first? Say that's 3 clean rooms. I'm going to go turn on 3 clean rooms, validate those applications, bring them back. Then I'm going to roll to the next set of applications. Or while I'm transitioning from a clean room to an SPE, I can start the process through automation of building up the next clean room and start creating a cycle of cleaning up the applications and bringing those back to production in an order that the staff can handle and based on the resource demands. Right? There's a lot of money that gets tied up on this. And do I need resources available immediately, or can I consume them on demand? We have customers doing this on-prem, right? And they have a standby VMware cluster that's available. And as we restore apps, we pull off another one and we put another app in the app clean room and bring it up. But the cloud can make a lot of sense here because I can get those on demand, build them up, and then move to the next one while I shut the first one down. So, but kind of a great way to control your expenses, or maybe I reverse that and switch it. I'm going to do on-demand resources for DR, and I'm going to have CR stood up and available all the time, right? So this becomes very flexible, and automation is key to it for how do I consume it as I need it based on the process that I'm trying to run. Right here in the jumps. So another way to view the model, right? As I come up, I'm going to get stronger when I'm offering, right? To higher them up in the model, I'm truly optimizing to reduce those RPOs and RTOs. And every time I make a step up in maturity, I'm going to find better processes and ways to get better about my recovery as I start to really understand what it takes for IT and the IT operations team to get the applications back. And then as I understand that and makes it to the next level, there's another piece of automation that can take advantage of that. And then you really understand the applications, where they're going, what they're talking to, what are the things I need outside of the application to make it run. I'll go back to even that list. A lot of times when we were talking about this and prepping with Josh, a lot of people will say, hey, we need to restore the EHRs first. That's the first thing that has to be up. Well, I can't really talk to an EHR if I don't have DNS, and I can't access it if I don't have my directory services. But then I can't even talk to the other team if I haven't set up collab, right? I'm going to need tools and things like that available. And maybe those are defined as a tier 0, and those are recovered differently than data restoration process. And even, another commercial for Rubrik is the identity recovery that has recently been introduced is pretty powerful. How do I take Active Directory and put that into the clean room? Or how do I take it and make sure it's good in the clean room and bring that back on-prem and restore it very quickly? And that's an interesting area. Now I can have my directory, right, and Active Directory services restored in the same place as I'm restoring data and joining those technologies together. Where we kind of, in the past seen directory restores as a like kind of an independent and niche product that would be stuck for that.
Just one note, we will take questions at the end, so please submit them to the chat feature. I know a couple have come in already, and we'll make sure to address those towards the end.
So what has AHEAD done? So the first thing is we have a reference architecture, so you see a pretty detailed design of that. That's actually been built by our principal consultant that designs a lot of these IREs for customers. There's a lot of lines going a lot of places there. I have a much simpler drawing coming up soon to help walk through it. We'll be able to show some of the products and capabilities of where we go with this. Plenty of architectures that we've done with a lot of our own intellectual property that we bring to help people accelerate the adoption of this model. This isn't just a PowerPoint slide that we're bringing to the table. We have code that we've developed and try to make it repeatable so we can help accelerate the servicing around enabling this. And then the run books, the ancillary services. I think one of the things that's key to this is testing and being able to test the process and be able to prove that you can run through the process with audit capability. We can help you with those run books, help you with the process and how they define it, and what it takes to bring a application back or the entire health system if I need to. It's a kind of an eye towards the blast radius of a cyber event. How isolated was that and how much data needs to be backed? Or if that thinking application maybe was impacted, but it's not showing any problems, then I just go off on the side and stand up that clean room and just check a copy of data if I need it before I have to go do a recovery. So lots of capabilities that can be added to an environment for this, and a lot of it that AHEAD has already performed. And I'll even show off some of the IP that we've developed for turning this on demand and walk through it in your architecture. So the services that AHEAD brings to the table. So the first place to start on the far left side, right? Current state analysis is typically going to be a data center driven operation of what your current data protection route. We've done some analysis with customers, even a big health system based in Atlanta. So there's a local health system that I personally work with a lot. We sold them Rubrik Enterprise. They weren't taking advantage of all the features, right? The gap analysis there could be part of it. And do I have enough capacity for my needs or pensions? Bottom left, we call it a business impact analysis. This is a common industry term, but we've taken a different slant on it to take a cyber approach to it. Now, if you've done a BIA in the past or anything similar to a BIA, those can be inputs to one for a cyber defense posture. And what do I need to look at to secure my applications and what truly needs to come back? Like Josh had that list of applications. That's a great list, but does that apply to your business and your healthcare system? Just like it does everything else in the industry, or do you need to take a different look at it? And health systems look at things and run things differently. They're not always following the Epic hardware config side, right? The config that there will be a little bit of a deviation to that, or they'll have workloads running in different places because instead of just doing traditional prod DR, they approach it with an active actor because they have nice data centers in close distance. You're going to recover those differently because maybe you have impact at one data center, not the other. But these things need to be understood in a business impact analysis so we can create that process and the inputs for everything that happens to the right. And this is, we call it a BIA. I mentioned it earlier, I love the Rubrik term as a minimal viable hospital. Like what does it take to get patient care up and running and get, the doctors and nurseries serving the patient and allow IT to service them the way they're new to, and we're going to roll through those applications as we go. So once we perform that analysis, right, we can now start to design what is my true backup and recovery design going to look like? What do I need? How much hardware? What's my retention capabilities? And then design for that recovery status, not driving backups. How do I meet that 72-hour RPO? Do I have enough technology to do it? And then the infrastructure that's going to support it, right? So this is where we're going to really lean in between teams to understand, hey, what does privileged access management look like? What is my observability? What tools am I looking at to actually be able to report on that? Do I need to integrate my SIM with the Rubrik collection to say, hey, Rubrik detected an anomaly, but I didn't see it on the network, which is real. Do I need to actually invoke my incident response plan? Then we can build it. One of the things I'm a big advocate of is where are we building this? If there is going to be some on-prem technology that needs to exist, HEAD has a unique ability, if anybody hasn't seen it, our Foundry facility and the ability to roll out infrastructure in a very controlled manner anywhere on the globe, built to your specification and built for the design that we need. If anybody wants to join me in Illinois and go see the facility, I would love to tour it. It's a unique capability that we bring. But finally, I'm in the run phase. I'm in my day 2 operations. What can AHEAD help me do there? So there's always the need for governance, like ITSM. I'm a ServiceNow customer, and I'm using ServiceNow to help me manage my IT. Can I use that as an engine to drive some of the automation that we've built to make the IRE capable? And only certain people have access to go deploy it because they don't want to just turn it on, right? We're going to be very controlled about those resources. And then what does that recovery look like? What defines clean coming out of the clean room? And a checklist or something like that would dictate it, or a run book that I'm going to follow. Then my incident response integration, what does that look like? I've had a customer where they had to define actually who's going to talk to the media because they had an incident, and the way they found out was through the news station knocking on the front door that they wanted an interview because customer credit card numbers got out. So they had to think about and then plan who was going to take the news interview when they got asked. And that's one little detail that's in there. But these are some of the ancillary steps that we need to think about. Who's going to go where, what's going to happen, and what's going to happen in what order. And you don't want to decide that in an event, right? I don't want to try to figure this out after I've been hit. I need to do these exercises, whether you want to call them a tabletop or a workshop or just a planning section. But we need to start walking through that and define where steps are going to happen and he's going to do what and when.
Yeah.
And then validate it. Go ahead, Amy.
Jonathan, there's a question that came in, and I think it pertains to the slide. That's why I'm asking it now. But the person on the webinar had asked, if we already have Rubrik, what else do we need to achieve a full CR solution? And I know it's represented on the slide, but do you just want to talk about that, like how you'd build around it?
Yeah. So this is where I have to go back to the question of what does restoring trust look like? How do I rebuild that trust? Do I trust that I had enough backups and I was going back far enough back in time to validate that I had clean data? Or do I need something else that there's, hey, the ransom hadn't been triggered yet, but I saw something in the network in my network security resources that said that there was an IP address, right, conflict or something where we saw somebody asked us that we need to do a deeper check. And this could be, am I looking at CyberArk? Am I using Azure, Cloud Defender? CrowdStrike Falcon is a very common one that we see. Another privileged access management into the clean room to make sure that only the right person or the right people have access to it, so that I know when they say it's clean, it's clean. So that common one that we see there is a tool called Delinea. By using CyberArk to scan for different types of events in the environment. And then do I need to correlate? Say I was running Splunk, right, and I need to look for events on the network to find out the exact time that something happened, to see, hey, Rubrik found it at this time, but there may have been an event earlier on the network, and I need to go to an earlier point in time, and I want to choose that copy to test. And then I'm going to test the next one moving forward to see if I can come to an earlier point in time instead of the later.
Yeah. And just to add to that, right? So like if you look at number 3, that's the backup appliance, right? So in this case, Rubrik. But then more focused on, okay, like how do we build either a clean room, isolated secure production environments, and then more importantly, obviously the process, right? Like I think a lot of what you're preaching earlier is like, how do we actually validate some of the process, build out the run books, more importantly, like IR integration. And so I think for our listeners out there who are currently Rubrik clients, like, there's more to do, and we can help you there. And this is how we see the world from our perspective.
Yep. And then the final piece is, how do I maintain this, right? And after head managed services would come in and offload some of the operational tasks to support the team, right? So this is a great complementary service, or we can completely run it, right? So we have the ability to host an IRE if that's a requirement. So lots of options there for where AHEAD through our managed services organization can augment what a company is dealing with. But you don't want to be looking for people when an event has happened. You want to know who to call, when to call, where to put them. So, well, man, I thought we had more slides. But yeah, so the reference architecture. I'm not a fan of having a ton of slides, so kind of glad I'm cut out a hustle. So the first thing, top right, so this is, we separated it in the diagram, but commonly you'll see this as one box. But this is your management layer, might be your out-of-band management. But this is where your infrastructure tools are going to be running, right? This is where vCenter is going to be. Am I capturing data for event monitoring? Am I using tools, tracking that? These might be like your DNS services. This is going to vary by customer, but the idea being these are the tools that we use to manage the environment. And then we have network firewall isolation based on the network, right? So that will help us to define what's going to talk to what in recovery, but also helping secure the environment and limit blast radius. So we have our Rubrik there. There's our data protection, and we're replicating that. And in this model, we're using Azure. So the first customer that we built this with is built in Azure. And we're referencing that here. And then that's going to be actually what I show. But Azure doesn't have to be your only option, or AWS is a fantastic landing zone for IRE that we can help the customer build. And we're replicating a copy there because we're going to use the cloud as on-demand resources. So I'm using that copy in the cloud of the faster recovery for testing that data. And then I'm sending all my metadata to the Rubrik Security Cloud. So I can find those anomalies, find detection, be able to run the operations that I need to help me monitor and control the environment. Bottom right, I have my production environment and the systems that are going to make that. So I may have VCF running there. I may have a 3-tier storage network. Then I have my Active Directory, main core application, data services, if an Epic, there could be Clarity, things like that. And then I'll have HCI potentially for end user compute in that modern workspace environment. But the key is I'm getting that copy of data. I'm protecting all that on-prem. I'm getting events and notification about the success of my data from RSC, and I'm putting a copy close to where I'm going to run those recovery operations. So that's that recovery path is. And then once I define that, right, then I'm going to have those orchestration tools. So what does it take to clean the data and test it before I put it back? So that's where you see the Linea, Azure Defender, CrowdStrike's in there. Palo with XSOAR platform, right? We've used Rapid7, we've used CyberArk is in there. Then also Palo and Panorama being the C. And then I have my native services. So I've got my pipeline, I've got my Git repository, Active Directory, or I have Enter ID, I have Key Vaults. All those are available in your cloud. I'm going to take advantage of those, like a few native services, and spin them up and spin them down as I need. And then just above that, right, we see a clean room. Now this is isolated by an application. I do have access to it, and it's network controlled. So you see that IRE zone that would be there that would have controlled access to it, and Linea would be a tool that would authenticate there. And then I could have that running in ABS, and I could have native VM or native Azure services like Azure VMs or even Azure SQL if I need to restore data. But I'm really concerned about the data, not exactly the infrastructure that it's running on. Or I'm using ABS because I need to restore quickly, and I need to, if it's VMware on-prem, I want to be able to restore it to VMware in the cloud and test it as VMware. And then I'm going to bring in, have the orchestration tools that can be talked into the clean room through controlled access. So that's where you'd see like a file fin spin up once I create a VM, then you restore to a certain point of time and check and clean and make sure the data is clean before I decide what the next step. And then you see the model of multiple clean rooms. And we can show that right in the lab. I have potential for 3 clean rooms of what we have developed right now, but you can add as many as we need based on the design of your applications. Right, that goes back to the BIA. It says, hey, I'm going to restore these 10 VMs in one clean room, and I'm going to do that first because that is the most critical applications that need to come back. And then tier from there, and based on the operation of the restore processing. And then I could have in the cloud, I could have that standby production environment, or that could be on-prem, right? It depends on what you're going to define, as the customer is going to define, what does it take to put that back in production. But that's all being able to test off a clean copy of data, but also something that I can audit to prove to a HIPAA auditor that I did this in controlled operations, and here's the process that I followed, and here's where I proved that I had clean data before I restored it. Because going back to that requirement of restoring an application in 72 hours, I don't want to bring it back, and all I did was re-expose myself because I didn't patch the hole that somebody used to impact my environment.
Perfect. So, Jonathan, if I'm not mistaken, you have a live demo for us?
Yes, we're doing it live.
Well, while Jonathan's pulling that up, I know that there's one question that came in. And so for the viewers out there, feel free to submit additional questions. We'll try to get to them. Josh, maybe I'll pick on you to answer this next question while Jonathan's bringing up the demo. But one viewer out there asked, what retention length are you recommending? 7 days, 14 days? They didn't specify, but I assume what they mean within the IRE. Like, what do you see as best practices, Josh, out there?
So there's some statistics that talk about the median length of dwell time. So really what you're talking about is the time between when the malware was introduced to your environment but not doing any harm yet, and when you found out you had a problem. You need to have some snapshots and recover points that were before the malware was introduced, or you're going to end up manually cleaning all of your data through the clean room, which is a really time-consuming and intensive process. So I don't think it's on me or that I should represent myself as having enough expertise to say this is the amount of time that works for everybody. A lot of our customers are looking at, retaining 30 days on disk to ensure that they've got enough. What I would say is that you should have some combination of, high granularity on disk and then followed by periodic archives off to some, archive of some sort so that you can always go back to a previous point in time. But just know there's a trade-off there of, the fewer days you keep on disk, when you go to an archive, you may lose a bit more data, right? So I think 14 days, that's definitely on the low end. 30, 45 days would be on the high end, and it's up to organizations to pick their comfort level and what they can afford in between those data points.
Great. Jonathan, you want to kind of talk through what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so this is Rubrik Security Cloud. I think I called it something different earlier, so I corrected myself. So this is a threat has been detected. So Rubrik is doing its thing and notifying you that, hey, we found anomalous activity. We have high confidence that something broke and you need to go do something about it. So this is the point where we would get that notification and we would start our incident response plan. From here, you could immediately say, hey, I trust that this application and this data is good. I'm going to go recover it immediately back to production. Like, not what we would recommend, but we certainly see a lot of customers doing it because they have full belief that Rubrik is going to do what it needs to do. We're going to put that data back. But if we made the decision collectively, right, that we need to run through the cleaning process, we need that clean bill of health from every machine that's going to be involved. So we want to get to the point where we can clean that data. I can now start. All right, I need to be able to put that data back in another copy. The first customer that we had that did this was backing up VMware VMs, but they were actually going to run the clean process without VM, right? So instead of being able to recover a full snapshot, we had to make the decision that, hey, we're going to do a recovery to out of place, right? We're going to put the data back in Azure. So we're going to use an Azure VM, not a VMware VM, put a copy of data on it, and then run the clean checks on it. And then once we found we were clean, use that copy to come back. And one thing I did skip over, right? So we have a copy of data. Hey, we've identified that, hey, April 18th, which was, almost 2 weeks ago, is where we detected the problem, and we got to go back to a copy of this before you. And then when I look at recovery, right, I'm saying, all right, the last good copy I had was April 12th. So that's the copy I'm going to go to. Hopefully you're running backups more often than I do in the lab. You would have a closer copy than that, but this goes to the point, like kind of about the question about how far in time do I have to go back? And that's going to be right to the way Josh answered it. But you think about the term commonly used well time. How far back in time do I have to be able to recover? And am I tiering that data, or do I need to leave that data active, right? And if you're thinking about Rubrik, am I archiving that to an S3 target? Or do I need enough time so I can restore faster without having to go too far back? But here, right, I could run a restore, and I'm going to restore this data inside the clean room, right? So I'm going to push a copy to a VM that's inside, and the only thing that's going to be able to talk to that VM are the privileged users in Rubrik, right, in this case. And then their cleaning tools are going to run inside that have been orchestrated to go through and run those checks. So this is that process where I'm going to start my restore for give me that copy of data. Now, if that's not acceptable, right, running from VMware VMs on-prem to an Azure VM in the cloud with just a copy of data, like that might be a decision point to say, hey, no, I need Azure VMware service running so I can actually mount those copies directly from Rubrik and then process that data in a VMware format, not in just a native file format. So jumping into Azure, right? So here's a quick look at some of our code. So lots of repos, like lots of places that this is going to run. Kind of the most that people are interested in seeing is the clean room code, and then the networking code, because that is networking layer is very important to know how we control that access, what's talking to what, and how do I control kind of what's ingress and egress. At a kind of physical networking layer, I know it's cloud, but what it takes to make those connections happen. And then this mostly runs through a single pipeline. Right? So I have that stood up here. Like I can scroll through this. Like it's a pretty good amount of code. This is the foundation for building out a clean room and taking advantage of a lot of the services to build this. But then I have my pipeline. And I'm lazy, right? I don't do a lot of C strokes anymore, so I like clicking buttons. But what does it take to run a pipeline, right? And then which clean room am I going to deploy? I'm super, creative with names, so I have clean room 1, 2, and 3. This could be defined by application, right? So this is where I've said my clean room 1 is going to be my core tier 0 services, like DNS. I'm going to put it back, like say that was info blocks, and I need to restore that, or instead of having that replicated actively. And then clean room 2, this could be my collab system, so I can talk to my teams again, because I run that still as a VM on-prem. And then clean room 3, so that's my EHR. Then I'm going to put back as quickly as possible and get up and running. But I want to be able to run those in isolated networks because they need some of the capabilities between them, but really want to be secure to all network access and the applications running in there. So now, I hit run. I ran this last night, so my clean room 1 is actually up and running. You can see here that we ran it in 25 minutes. So this time is going to be variable. Just depends on how many systems like that you're deploying. But I want to give people a look at the clean room and what that takes, right? So here's my resources running and some of the capabilities that we pulled in that was driven through the automation. Typically, you're going to see probably a lot more VMs or services that are running here based on your application needs. But this was all built through the pipeline. So this is the ability to turn on all of these resources. And then once I'm back, or once I've validated everything, right, I come back to the pipeline and I built it. And then I also have the ability to destroy it. So I'm going to bake it up and I'm going to tear it down in a clean, controlled way. So there's the visualization of it and what it looks like. So now in here, and I'm trying to rip that right. Here's my first VM that if I wanted to take that Clarity VM that had been attacked on-prem, I would come back and I would restore data here. And then I would run, like, say, a CrowdStrike Falcon against it. I did it with a bunch of unstructured data, right? I know Clarity is a database, but I could run those tools and go scan the files and look for those IOCs. And say if I find an IOC, pass that back to Rubrik to go run it on-prem while I'm running this clean process, just to see if it exists anywhere else in the environment. So that becomes a pretty unique capability and things we want to think about when before an attack happens, so we know where people are going. I'd hate to be in a situation where, the data protection engineer did their job, restored some data, but then was just sitting waiting right while another process was going to happen. That does happen. It's IT. People need to run their individual work streams. But if I'm doing that and security comes back and says, hey, we found, this hash, let's go look for it. The data protection team could be off running, doing some of their work while the security team is running their cleaning tools. And you can make a decision, hey, that data's clean. It passed all the tests. Let's work on restoring that while in the Rubrik Security Cloud and scanning to look for other problems to see if I need to go promote into the clean room and test other data. Or I didn't find the IOC. I'll keep in keep check boxes. Rubrik is saying it's clean. CrowdStrike saying it's clean. Let's go bring the application back. Or let's go to the SPE and test the application full stack. Make sure the user accepts what's going on. And we know the point of data that we are, and we know what it takes to bring the business back up and running. So that's the quick and dirty demo of having a look at what we're capable of building. And we do have customers doing this in Azure. We have the capability to do it in AWS if that's your preference, or we're working with a customer right now, a hospital system, to build this for an on-premise IRE with VCF running in an isolated network.
That's great. Thanks, Jonathan. I have a couple questions. It looks like one actually just came in as I was saying that. Maybe I'll jump to that one first. The question says, what's the advantage of having different clean rooms? I think the way you articulate, Jonathan.
Yeah, and the simple answer to that is I've done NSX and I've done microsegmentation. So I'm going to define a clean room to that network segmentation so that my recovery process is isolated to that domain, if you will, or that zone. And I'm checking those applications instead of checking every application before I say they're clean. But let me define what my recovery process is in smaller granular chunks so that I can cycle through them based on my resource sheet without it.
Yeah. The next question that I see is, and it's for either of you, how you guys want to answer it, but the importance of a BIA. And so is the BIA important in regards to building a full CR program? Like where does that fall within kind of your prerequisites?
So I think
I would say yes. Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
I think it's very important. It's not a question of which applications are you going to recover or not recover. You'll eventually recover all of them. But you need to know where you're going to start, right? And I think there's a argument to be made, like Jonathan was talking about, of you don't want to be figuring these things out in the wake of an attack. You want to do the slow thinking now so you can take fast action later. There was a healthcare system that presented at Chime Fall Forum, and they talked about how they actually didn't know what applications they had or any of their relative priorities. So they were trying to figure that out in the wake of an attack while everything was hard down. So I think anything you can do in advance to where you're just executing and the hard decisions have been made is really important. You'll eventually bring them back online, but you do have to start somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah, the point I would add to that is those numbers that Josh shared earlier on the financial justification. If you're going to the board to ask for money, you better have details on how much money you need. And that the BIA is going to help you understand all of that.
Yeah. And this question actually comes from myself. I was kind of thinking about it when Josh was talking for clients who are unaware of the HIPAA changes. Like, where's a good place to start? Now, I'll kind of take this one because our security team's been working on a gap assessment specifically pertaining to the new changes and developments with HIPAA. And so there's a shameless plug on the ad side that's for clients who are kind of going through this process, or more importantly, are looking for more guided answers. Again, obviously, the HIPAA changes are still in review for comments, and who knows where this is going to end. But the reality is, I think if you're looking for folks who've obviously worked with other clients or kind of just understand the best practice in the space, I think AHEAD's a good place to start, right? So I think from our perspective, we absolutely can have that conversation. We have some assessments that we're building through that we can guide clients towards, and more importantly, start to make pointed recommendations around how do we maybe even fill the gap around recovery. So last question I'll throw to Josh and John is okay. Well, where do clients start? Like, who should they reach out to on the Rubrik side, on the AHEAD side? Where's a good place to start for our viewers?
I thought we put your personal phone number on the bottom of the screen. Just call Andy.
I like that answer. Let's just call Andy.
Let's call Andy. Yeah, I'll be on the beach. Andy will solve your problem.
There you go.
I think it depends on what's that next step for you, right? And I heard one of our executives talk recently about how we keep moving the tent pole. And originally it was, will your data survive, right? And we feel like with Rubrik, we've solved that problem. And then it was, can we tell what's the clean data versus like what has indicators of compromise with it? And so we've solved that problem. And then orchestrated application recovery so that you can rapidly recover that application. We've solved that problem. And so now we're to, okay, where do I run them and how do I do that really quickly? And so I think wherever you are on that spectrum, we want to meet you where you're at and talk about like what's the next level of refinement that can help you recover more quickly. And we have, really great partner in AHEAD who's done a lot of the work, because let's be honest, Rubrik can't do everything and we don't try. So we have a certain set of tools that's all around survivability of your data and being able to threat hunt within it. But when you get to like looking at isolated recovery environments so that you can recover to some place that's trusted, that, people haven't messed with the configuration of your firewalls or ACLs, or, haven't created spurious service accounts in Active Directory that they can use to regain access. Creating that trusted, isolated recovery environment is something that we would look to AHEAD to be able to help a client set up. So, I think whether you reach out to the AHEAD folks or you reach out to the Rubrik folks, we'll eventually all be in a room together.
Mm-hmm. That's perfect. Now, and so Josh and Jonathan, I want to thank you guys for your time today. Obviously, the viewers who are still with us want to thank you for your time as well. As kind of Josh put it so eloquently, reach out to your sales reps from not only from the AHEAD side but also the Rubrik side. We'd be happy to facilitate pre-sales workshops to kind of talk through some of these fundamentals, as well as start solutioning with everyone who's interested to kind of going down this path. And so that being said, Josh, Jonathan, want to thank you guys for joining us on the webinar series, and looking forward to more conversations like this.
Yeah, no, it was a great conversation, Josh. Appreciate your time too.
Yeah, thank you to AHEAD.
Thanks, everyone.